Tonight, we enter the long, wind-burnished story of Persia, not as a single empire, but as a deep current of power moving for nearly 5,000 years beneath the stones of Western Asia. You begin in the pale morning light of the Iranian plateau, where the land rises like a sleeping animal between Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the warm southern seas. In 1933, when excavations at Persepolis began under the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago, archaeologists brushed dust from stairways, reliefs, tablets, and broken halls that had waited in silence for centuries. They were not merely finding ruins, they were uncovering a system. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the room grows quieter, tell us where you are listening from and what the local time is beside you. Somewhere, perhaps, another listener is awake beneath a different sky, following the same ancient road. You stand now in a landscape of bronze dust and distant mountains. The air is dry enough to sting the lips. Underfoot, the ground carries the memory of caravan tracks, hoofprints, irrigation channels, and the slow pressure of human ambition. The plateau is not generous in the easy way of river valleys. It does not hand out grain without negotiation. It asks for planning, endurance, and obedience to the seasons. Perhaps that is why power here learns patience early. Far to the west, the great river worlds of Mesopotamia are already old. Their temples rise from mud brick. Their scribes press signs into clay. Their kings speak to gods through smoke and sacrifice. Yet eastward, across the Zagros Mountains, another world gathers itself quietly. It is less visible at first, less eager to leave grand declarations behind. It lives in fortified settlements, hill paths, herds, fields, and small communities tied to water like breath to sleep. Records from excavations across western Iran confirm that long before the Achaemenid kings appeared, the region was filled with layered societies, trade routes, and political experiments. Scholars connected with the University of Pennsylvania Museum and other major American institutions have studied objects from places such as Susa, where administrative tablets and seals reveal a world already skilled in counting, storing, ruling, and remembering. That is the first quiet truth. Persia does not begin with a crown. It begins with paperwork. A little unromantic. Yes, but empires adore lists. You can almost hear the scratch of a reed stylus. Grain counted, animals marked, labor assigned. Clay sealed shut under the thumb of an official who has no idea that thousands of years later, someone will call his little lump of accounting evidence. His world smells of warm mud brick, sesame oil, wool, smoke, and damp storage rooms. His hands are probably tired. His supervisor is probably unpleasant. History, as usual, is built partly by people trying to finish work before sunset. In the distance, the Zagros ridges stand blue and hard against the sky. These mountains are not barriers alone. They are filters. Through them pass metals, horses, ideas, raiders, merchants, languages, and the uneasy rumors of stronger neighbors. For generations, peoples move through these corridors. Some settle, some vanish into names preserved only by outsiders. Some become part of the larger Iranian-speaking world that will one day produce kings who speak of truth, order, and royal destiny. Yet nothing here is simple. The story is not a straight road from tribe to empire. It is more like a buried city, one room opening into another, some chambers collapsed, some still painted faintly in the dark. Modern historians debate how sharply we should separate early Iranian groups from older local cultures, and the question remains open among scholars. The archaeological layers suggest contact, blending, migration, and adaptation rather than one clean arrival. The past rarely respects our labels. It prefers dust. Your mind drifts toward Susa, one of the ancient centers tied to the Elamite world. Its name seems to come out of deep time, long before Persian kings ruled there. Elamite rulers looked westward toward Mesopotamia and eastward into the highlands. They wrote in their own language, honored their own gods, and built a civilization that both borrowed from and resisted its neighbors. Here, power did not yet wear the Persian face, but it prepared the stage. The city breathes in heat. Courtyards shimmer. Dogs sleep in strips of shade. Somewhere a child watches officials carry jars marked with seals. Somewhere a priest crosses a threshold heavy with incense, the smoke rising into a ceiling darkened by years. You're not looking at the Persian Empire yet. You're looking at the soil from which it will grow, crowded with older roots. A mainstream historical fact sits calmly at the center of this opening landscape. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, founded in the 6th century BC, became one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen. But the structures that made such expansion possible, record-keeping, regional administration, long-distance trade, and political negotiation, had older precedents in the lands around Iran and Mesopotamia. Yale historians and specialists in ancient Near Eastern studies often emphasize that no empire rises from nothing. It borrows tools from the dead. That thought changes the air. The first Persian kings did not invent authority from empty ground. They inherited landscapes already trained in obedience, resistance, and memory. They learned from Elamite administrators. They absorbed Mesopotamian kingship. They spoke to mountain peoples and lowland cities in different voices. Their genius would not only be conquest, it would be translation. There is a strange tidbit here, almost too small for the grand halls of empire. Some ancient royal traditions describe kings not only as warriors, but as gardeners. In Persian memory, the royal garden becomes a miniature world, measured, watered, shaded, and controlled. The later word for such enclosed gardens would travel far beyond Iran and eventually shape the idea of paradise. Imagine that. Behind armies, taxes, and stone inscriptions waits a garden wall. Inside it, fruit trees, flowing water, and carefully arranged shade. Even empire dreams of a cool place to sit. The silence deepens. You walk over a plain where nothing dramatic seems to happen. That is often where the oldest truths hide. The empire to come will be famous for its roads, messengers, armies, palaces, and royal proclamations. Yet its beginnings are quieter than legend suggests. They are in the need to connect scattered lands. They are in the difficulty of moving grain through mountains. They are in the challenge of ruling people who do not speak the same language, pray in the same temples, or remember the same ancestors. This is where Persia first becomes unsettling, not because of some wild secret, but because of its calm intelligence. It understands that power is not only the sword. Power is the archive. Power is the road marker. Power is the official who knows how much barley came from a village last year, and how much should come this year. Power is the seal pressed into clay, saying this belongs to the king, even when the king is nowhere nearby. For a moment, it feels as though the whole plateau is listening. The mountains hold their shadows. The desert wind moves across thorn bushes and broken stone. You sense civilizations not as bright monuments, but as arrangements of labor, fear, hope, and habit. People wake, carry water, mend harness, argue over debts, pray for rain, and look toward distant rulers with cautious eyes. The hidden timeline begins there, long before the name Persia becomes a force in Greek memory, long before royal inscriptions announce kings of kings, long before armies cross the Bosporus or stand outside Babylon. The region is already learning the grammar of empire. It is learning how many days a caravan needs between valleys. It is learning which clans can be trusted, which cities must be watched, and which gods must never be insulted too directly. Perhaps the most important thing you notice is restraint. Early power in this world does not always shout. Sometimes it waits inside clay tablets stacked on shelves. Sometimes it hides in a road that seems ordinary until soldiers use it. Sometimes it sits in the memory of a conquered city, where people learn that a new ruler may arrive, but the taxes still come due. There is comfort in seeing history this way. It becomes less like a parade of famous men, and more like a vast, dimly lit house. You pass through one room and feel another behind the wall. You hear footsteps above you, though no one is there. The Persian Empire is not yet fully visible, but its outline begins to form in the dark, wide enough to hold many peoples, old enough to remember worlds that came before it. And in that slow beginning, beneath the dawn, you find the first truth. Persia was never only a place. It was a method of holding distance together. Your mind drifts into a world before Persian kings have crowns, before the royal road has dust from imperial messengers, before the name of Persia gathers the weight of fear and admiration. The land is older than its later fame. It lies under a wide sky, cut by mountain chains, dry basins, river valleys, and high pastures where the wind presses grass flat against the earth. You move through a country of scattered fires, small fortified settlements, and people who know the value of water with a seriousness modern life often forgets. Here, power begins with wells. A spring in this landscape is not scenery. It is survival, argument, inheritance, and sometimes war. Families settle where water can be guided into fields. Herders move with animals through seasonal routes, following grass that appears briefly and vanishes. Traders carry lapis, tin, wool, grain, timber, and stories from one region to another. Nothing feels like empire yet. Still, the habits of connection are already forming. In the western lowlands, the old Elamite world stands with its own proud memory. Susa is one of its great centers, a city with deep roots and long patience. Archaeological work connected with French missions, American museums, and universities such as Pennsylvania has shown that Susa was occupied across many ages, with layers of buildings, burials, seals, and administrative objects stacked like a slow argument between centuries. You do not see one city. You see many cities sleeping on top of each other. The air there is warmer, heavier, more river-bound. Mud brick walls hold the day's heat. Courtyards smell of dust, animals, stored grain, and cooking oil. A potter turns clay with steady fingers. A seal cutter studies the curve of an animal's back. A woman pours water from a jar into a basin, and the sound is small, domestic, eternal. This is not the stage people usually imagine when they think of mighty Persia. Yet without places like this, the later empire would have had fewer tools, fewer models, fewer memories to borrow. The Elamites keep records. They govern land. They negotiate with Mesopotamia. They raid, trade, worship, build, collapse, and return. Their language is not the same as later Persian speech, and their identity cannot simply be folded into someone else's story. That matters. When you look closely, the roots of Persia are not pure and solitary. They are tangled, very tangled. Thank goodness. Clean origins are usually suspicious. A mainstream historical fact becomes clear in the clay and stone. The Achaemenid Persians later used Elamite scribes and Elamite language in imperial administration, especially in the Great Archive of Persepolis. Scholars from the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute helped reveal thousands of administrative tablets there, showing workers, rations, officials, animals, and supplies moving through a carefully managed system. The old Elamite habit of recording things did not disappear. It entered the machinery of Persian rule. For now, though, you remain in the age before that machinery has a royal emblem. The plateau is filled with different peoples. Some live in settled agricultural villages. Some move with flocks. Some guard passes. Some control pockets of fertile land. Names emerge from outside texts like figures half seen through smoke meads: Persians, Manaeans, Elamites, Kassites, and others whose boundaries are difficult to draw. Ancient writers sometimes make them sound tidy. The ground disagrees. Modern scholars still debate how early Iranian-speaking groups entered and spread through the plateau, and whether the process should be imagined as migration, gradual infiltration, cultural blending, or several overlapping movements. Oxford historians and archaeologists often caution against turning language families into marching armies. People can adopt speech, customs, tools, gods, and names without moving like a single dramatic wave. History is rarely that considerate. You cross a mountain path at dusk. The stones are sharp under sandals. Smoke rises from a small settlement ahead, thin and blue against the dimming air. Goats complain from behind a thorn fence. Someone is hammering metal in a workshop. The sound irregular but confident. A child watches strangers with the solemn stare children have used since the beginning of towns. In the doorway behind him, an elder measures you without smiling. These communities know the larger world exists. They may hear of Assyrian kings to the west, fierce men who carve victories into stone and move defeated peoples across their lands. They may hear of Urartu to the north, of Babylon in the south, of merchants from far beyond the horizon. But the mountain village does not become less important because a great king has written a longer inscription. Local power matters. Local chiefs matter. A blocked pass can humble a royal plan. In this earlier world, authority is close enough to smell. It smells of leather, sweat, smoke, and stored barley. It is the authority of the household head, the clan leader, the priest, the warrior, the person who knows where the next pasture lies. It is not yet the distant king of kings claiming the 4 quarters of the earth. It is a man at a gate deciding whether you may enter with your animals before nightfall. There is a quirky fringe tidbit that clings to this landscape like a desert burr. Some later traditions and modern imaginative theories have tried to link the ancient Iranian plateau with lost wisdom schools, hidden star knowledge, or mysterious mountain brotherhoods guarding secrets from a vanished age. Serious archaeology does not confirm such stories, naturally, and the mountains refuse to hand over convenient proof. Still, you can understand why such ideas grow here. A lonely pass at night can make any traveler believe someone is watching from above. The stars sharpen over the plateau. You sit near a fire where the flames bend in the wind. Around you, People speak in voices that are gone now. Their words do not survive, yet their choices do. They build walls on ridges. They guide water through channels. They bury the dead with objects chosen carefully. They decorate pottery with forms that repeat, change, and travel. They make alliances through marriage, oath, gift, and threat. They do not know they are preparing a future empire. No one ever does. The world of the Medes begins to gather in the northwestern highlands, though its early history is difficult to separate from legend and later storytelling. Assyrian records mention Median groups, often as troublesome mountain peoples, useful allies, or targets for punishment. Greek writers later describe Median kings in more structured terms, but those accounts were shaped by distance and imagination. A scholarly debate remains open over how centralized the Median kingdom truly was before Persian expansion. Some see a strong state. Others see a looser confederation made grander by later memory. This uncertainty is not a weakness. It is part of the atmosphere. You are listening to history through walls. Perhaps the Medes had royal centers more powerful than surviving evidence proves. Perhaps their authority moved through networks of chiefs rather than a single polished court. Perhaps Greek writers gave them a shape that made better sense to foreign readers. The result is a misty political landscape, and that mist is honest. Ancient power often leaves behind broken outlines, not neat portraits. At the same time, the Persians themselves begin as one group among others, likely connected with lands in southwestern Iran, near the region later known as Parsa. They are not yet world rulers. They are a people in motion through the opportunities and pressures of a crowded plateau. They learn from stronger neighbors, evade danger when necessary, and wait in the shadow of larger powers. Waiting can be a political skill. It is not glamorous, but it works. Imagine a young Persian noble growing up in this environment. He hears tales of Elamite cities, Median chiefs, Assyrian violence, Babylonian wealth, and mountain gods. He sees that rulers must speak differently to farmers, herders, priests, warriors, and scribes. He understands that a king who relies only on force becomes tired very quickly. Someone must count the grain. Someone must repair the road. Someone must persuade the conquered that tomorrow will be bearable. So the foundations deepen in quiet ways. The plateau teaches endurance. Elam teaches administration. Mesopotamia teaches royal symbolism. The mountains teach caution. The roots between them teach scale, piece by piece, without trumpet or marble certainty. A political imagination forms large enough to hold diversity without immediately crushing it. You feel the night cool against your skin. The fire sinks lower, beyond the circle of light. Animals shift in their sleep, and the mountain dark becomes thick and absolute. There are no imperial proclamations here, only the faint signs of a world learning how to become larger than itself. Before crowns, there are clans. Before palaces, there are storage rooms. Before conquest, there are roads no one has named yet. And before Persia becomes an empire, it becomes a listener, absorbing every older voice the plateau is willing to give. For a moment, it feels as though the whole plateau has drawn one long breath. The scattered lands of highland chiefs, old cities, river kingdoms, and restless borders begin to bend toward a single name: Cyrus. The name comes quietly at first, not as thunder, but as a rumor crossing passes, markets, campfires, and palace corridors. People hear that a Persian ruler has risen in the southwest, a man who does not yet look like the master of the ancient Near East. Not to everyone. Not yet. You stand near the edge of a settlement where the morning smells of sheep wool, ash, and crushed herbs. Men are loading pack animals. Women are tying bundles with practiced hands. A messenger has arrived before sunrise, his cloak stiff with dust. He speaks of a revolt against the Medes, of shifting loyalties, of a Persian lord gathering strength with dangerous speed. No one fully trusts the news. No one can ignore it either. The story of Cyrus the Great is difficult to separate from later admiration. Greek writers shaped him into an ideal ruler. Babylonian records presented him in ways useful to local politics. Persian memory placed him near the foundation of royal greatness. Yet beneath the polished surface, something real and extraordinary remains. In the 6th century BC, Cyrus transformed Persia from a regional power into the center of a vast empire. Historians at institutions such as Yale and Oxford often treat his reign as a turning point in imperial history, not only because he conquered, but because he governed with unusual flexibility. That flexibility matters. He does not build power by pretending that all conquered peoples are the same. He does not force every city to forget its gods, its temples, or its old names, at least not as a general habit. His genius lies partly in allowing local traditions to continue, while placing them beneath Persian authority. The result is subtle and a little unsettling. People may keep their songs, their priests, their festivals, their market days, but the horizon has changed. Above them now stands a wider order. Cyrus first turns against the Medes. If later accounts are to be trusted in their broad outline, the exact details remain debated, especially because Greek narratives and Near Eastern evidence do not always fit together comfortably. Some scholars suggest the change from Median to Persian dominance may have involved elite alliances as much as simple battlefield conquest. Others emphasize revolt, military victory, and the collapse of Median royal authority. The debate stays open, like a door left moving in the wind. You picture Ecbatana, remembered as a Median center of power, with its cool upland air and walls imagined by later writers in splendid colors. Whether every detail is reliable is another matter. Ancient authors did enjoy decorating a palace when given the chance. Still, you sense the importance of the place. To take control of Median networks is not merely to defeat a neighbor, it is to inherit routes, warriors, tribute, and the prestige of ruling older highland peoples. Power changes hands. The world adjusts. Then Cyrus looks outward. Lydia waits in the west, wealthy and proud, ruled by Croesus, whose name later becomes a byword for impossible riches. There are coins, horses, fortified cities, Greek communities along the coast, and the gleam of gold from the Pactolus River. It is a different world from the Iranian highlands, softer in some ways, richer in others, and tied closely to the Aegean. When Cyrus defeats Lydia around the middle of the 6th century BC, Persia touches the Greek world directly. A new unease enters the Western Sea. The fall of Croesus becomes wrapped in moral storytelling. Greek tradition loves to imagine warnings ignored, prophecies misunderstood, and rich kings learning that fortune has teeth. One famous tale says, Croesus asked an oracle whether he should attack Persia, and was told he would destroy a great empire. He did. Unfortunately for him, it was his own. Historians handle this story carefully, of course, but as a bedtime reminder about overconfidence, it does have a certain efficient cruelty. You walk through Sardis in imagination, after the city has fallen. The air is thick with smoke from cooking fires, not necessarily destruction. Soldiers stand at corners, their accents strange to local ears. Merchants reopen stalls because life, with its rude practicality, insists on continuing. Someone counts confiscated goods. Someone negotiates terms. Someone wonders whether the new king will be harsher or merely differently inconvenient. Cyrus does not rule by softness alone. That would be a pretty story. And pretty stories often lie. Armies march. Cities surrender because refusal can be disastrous. Rebellion is dangerous. Imperial mercy works best when everyone remembers the alternative. Yet his reputation for measured rule is not meaningless. In a world where conquest could erase communities, Cyrus often presents himself as restorer, protector, and chosen ruler rather than simple destroyer. That image becomes one of Persia's strongest instruments. Records associated with Babylon later portray him as favored by the city's great god, entering as a ruler who repairs order. Whether you accept that as sincere belief, political theater, or both, the message is clear. Cyrus understands that a city's heart cannot be held by spears alone. Temples matter. Priests matter. Old ceremonies matter. The conquered must be given a language in which submission feels almost like continuity. This is empire as translation again, but now on a grander scale. Cyrus speaks to each region through its own memories. To highland warriors, he is a victorious lord. To Babylonian priests, he is a restorer of sacred order. To Greek observers, he becomes the noble Eastern monarch, half history and half lesson. To later Persians, he is the origin point of greatness. One man, many faces. Useful. Yes, rather exhausting too. The quirky tidbit here is almost charming. Later stories claim Cyrus was raised in humble circumstances after being marked for death as an infant. A familiar ancient pattern where destiny hides in a child and frightens a king. The tale appears in Greek tradition, full of shepherds, dreams, and royal anxiety. Modern historians do not treat it as straightforward fact. Still, such legends reveal how ancient people explained sudden power. A conqueror this successful must have been chosen early. They thought. Apparently, normal childhood was not dramatic enough. You follow Cyrus eastward in thought, toward lands less clearly visible in surviving records. His empire expands across regions that connect Iran with Central Asia, where steppe, oasis, and mountain meet under wide skies. These campaigns are harder to reconstruct, and the evidence thins, but their importance is immense. The Persian world is not only westward-facing, it also reaches into the deep interior of Asia, toward riders, traders, and frontier peoples who do not easily submit to anyone. There is dust everywhere. The empire grows not as a painted map, but as a system of negotiated distances. Local rulers are retained or replaced. Garrisons appear. Tribute moves. Messengers begin carrying commands across spaces that would exhaust a less organized kingdom. The great achievement is not simply that Cyrus wins battles. Many kings win battles and leave nothing stable behind. Cyrus creates a pattern others can continue. And yet, you do not need to imagine him as gentle. Ancient kings do not belong in modern comfort. They rule with hierarchy, labor, punishment, and war. The calmest inscription can stand on the back of frightened people. The most tolerant policy can still mean taxes extracted from tired hands. To understand Cyrus, you hold two truths at once. He is unusually adaptable by ancient imperial standards. He is also an conqueror building supremacy across other people's homes. That double vision keeps the story honest. As evening lowers over the plateau, you sense why his rise mattered so deeply. Before him, Persia was one power among others. Under him, it becomes the axis around which older kingdoms must turn. The empire begins to gather languages like beads on a cord: Elamite, Akkadian, Aramaic, Lydian, Egyptian, Greek, and many others enter its orbit. Roads become veins, courts become listening chambers. Tribute becomes the rhythm by which distant lands acknowledge a ruler they may never see. Somewhere, a scribe presses wet clay. Somewhere, a conquered priest decides which words will make the new king acceptable. Somewhere, a soldier from the mountains sees the sea for the first time and says nothing, because wonder can be dangerous among armed men. Cyrus opens the gates not only of cities, but of scale. After him, the ancient world feels larger and more tightly held. The silence around his name is not empty. It is the silence of people realizing that a new kind of power has arrived, patient enough to borrow their traditions, strong enough to command their roads, and distant enough to feel almost like weather. In your ears, the echo changes into the low murmur of Babylon. You approach it across a flat world of canals, fields, date palms, and slow brown water, where the Euphrates moves like a tired god through the heat. The city does not appear all at once. First come the gardens and farms, then the outer settlements, then the walls rising through haze, vast and pale against the sky. Even from a distance, Babylon feels less like a city than a decision made by centuries. The air smells of river mud, bitumen, donkey sweat, baking bread, and incense drifting from temple courts. Boatmen shout along the canals. Merchants argue under awnings. A priest climbs steps worn smooth by generations of bare feet. Somewhere inside the city, scribes copy omens, accounts, hymns, and royal claims in signs pressed into clay. Babylon is not merely inhabited. It is written. By the time Cyrus approaches, Babylon carries the weight of ancient prestige. It has been capital, prize, symbol, and wound. Its temples hold memories older than the Persians. Its scholars read the sky with obsessive care, watching planets, eclipses, and strange weather as if heaven itself were a tablet waiting to be translated. If you rule Babylon, you do not simply gain land. You gain permission to stand inside one of humanity's oldest conversations with power, and yet the city falls with surprisingly little thunder. A mainstream historical fact stands at the center of this quiet drama. In 539 BC, Cyrus took Babylon and absorbed the Neo-Babylonian kingdom into the expanding Persian Empire. Babylonian chronicles and royal inscriptions indicate that the conquest was presented as orderly, even divinely approved, although historians remain careful about the political purpose of those texts. Scholars at institutions such as Harvard and Chicago have often noted that the official language of conquest can hide fear, negotiation, and pressure beneath calm phrases. That calm is the unsettling part. The surviving Babylonian account describes the Persian entry in language that suggests limited destruction, at least compared with the terrible possibilities of ancient siege warfare. The city's last native king, Nabonidus, had become controversial, especially among powerful religious circles. He had spent years away from Babylon, favored the moon god in ways that disturbed the priesthood of Marduk, and left his son Belshazzar to manage affairs. Ancient cities could forgive many things. Neglecting their gods was not one of them. You can almost feel the tension in the temple courtyards. Priests move through shadowed halls where lamps burn before sacred images. Their robes whisper against stone. They hear reports from the north. Reports of Persian victories. Reports of soldiers changing allegiance. Some fear invasion. Others may quietly imagine opportunity. A foreign king who honors Marduk could be preferable to a local king who offends him. Politics often enters by the side door wearing religious clothing. The open scholarly debate remains delicate. Did Babylon welcome Cyrus as a liberator? Or did Persian propaganda polish a military conquest into a sacred restoration? Some historians emphasize internal dissatisfaction with Nabonidus. Others warn that elite priestly texts do not represent every resident in the city. The truth likely lies in a dim middle ground, where surrender, calculation, fear, and ritual language all share the same room. That middle ground feels very human. You stand near the Ishtar Gate in imagination, its glazed bricks blue as deep water, its bulls and dragons moving in rows like creatures from a controlled dream. The actual gate, known from museum reconstruction, belongs mainly to the age of Nebuchadnezzar II, whose Babylon had reached magnificent architectural confidence. Processional roads, temples, palaces, and walls created a sacred urban theater. A ruler entering such a city had to perform carefully. One wrong gesture could turn stone into accusation. Cyrus seems to understand this. He does not present himself as a vandal. He presents himself as chosen. The famous cylinder associated with his rule describes him restoring proper worship and returning divine images to their cities. Many later readers have called it an early charter of human rights, which is a beautiful phrase and perhaps a slightly overenthusiastic modern habit. Ancient royal inscriptions were not written by committees of gentle philosophers. They were written to make kings look necessary. Still, the policy behind the message mattered. A quirky tidbit clings to the story like temple dust. Later tradition sometimes imagines Babylon falling after the Euphrates was diverted, allowing troops to enter through the riverbed beneath the walls. Herodotus gives a dramatic version of this tale, complete with unsuspecting citizens and a city too large to realize at once that it had been taken. Modern scholars treat the account with caution, but admit the image is irresistible. A world empire entering through the city's own waterway is almost too poetic. Perhaps that is why it survives. You move through Babylon at night. The city is too large to sleep completely. Dogs bark from alleys. Lamps burn in courtyards. The river makes a soft pressing sound against embankments. Somewhere, soldiers pass without shouting, their weapons wrapped or held close. Somewhere else, a family listens behind a door, deciding whether silence is safer than prayer. The grand story says the city fell peacefully. The human story asks what peace feels like when armed strangers own the street. Cyrus's conquest of Babylon reshapes the meaning of empire. Until now, his authority has crossed mountains, conquered Lydia, absorbed Median power, and reached many peoples. But Babylon gives him the language of universal kingship. Babylonian rulers had long claimed cosmic responsibility, not merely political control. They repaired temples, restored order, fed gods, protected cities, and held chaos away from human life. By entering that tradition, Cyrus gains more than treasure. He gains an ancient script for legitimacy. The tablets would continue. The priests would continue. The markets would continue. That was the genius of it. Instead of smashing the great machine, Persia placed its hand on the lever. Clay records did not suddenly stop because a Persian sat above the system. Taxation, temple management, landholding, labor obligations, and commercial contracts went on. Ordinary people may have noticed new officials, new demands, and new fears, but also the strange persistence of daily routine. Bread still had to be baked. This is how empire becomes almost invisible, not because it is gentle, but because it learns to inhabit existing structures. The same canals carry water, the same scribes write accounts, the same temples receive offerings, yet the final authority has shifted, somewhere beyond the city, far away in a landscape many Babylonians will never see. A Persian king becomes the answer to questions of tribute, loyalty, and rebellion. The sensory world remains painfully ordinary. A baker slaps dough against an oven wall. A donkey refuses to move. A temple singer clears his throat before dawn. A mother scolds a child for stepping into canal mud. History books call this a conquest. Most people experience it as a rumor that slowly becomes a tax collector. The Hebrew Bible preserves another powerful memory of Cyrus, presenting him as the ruler who allowed exiled Judeans to return and rebuild their temple. That tradition made his name unusually luminous in later religious imagination. For many, he became not just a conqueror, but an instrument of restoration. The historical details are complex, and scholars continue to examine the relationship between imperial policy and local religious revival. Yet the larger pattern fits his rule. Let communities breathe, and they may carry your empire for you. That is almost more chilling than destruction. A city reduced to ash resists in memory. A city allowed to continue may learn to speak the conqueror's name in its own prayers. Babylon did not need to become Persian in language, dress, or soul. It only needed to accept that Persia now stood above its horizon. You pause beside the river as night thins toward morning. The water reflects a dull line of light. Above the city, stars fade slowly. The same stars Babylonian scholars had watched for omens. They searched the heavens for signs of disaster and favor. Yet perhaps the truest omen was already on earth, moving through gates, archives, temples, and storehouses. Babylon falls without thunder because Cyrus knows that silence can be useful. A quiet conquest can enter deeper than a loud one. It can leave walls standing, gods honored, scribes employed, and people uncertain whether they have witnessed an ending or merely a change in management. And in that uncertainty, Persian power becomes something larger than victory. It becomes a soft pressure over old worlds, a hand resting on the shoulder of civilization, steady, patient, and impossible to ignore. Your path turns from conquered cities to measured spaces, from the drama of gates to the quieter genius of administration. The empire has grown too large to survive on heroic memory alone. Roads must be kept open. Taxes must be counted. Governors must be watched. Soldiers must be paid. Irrigation must continue. Rebellion must be smelled before it catches flame. This is where Darius enters, not merely as a king, but as a man trying to make distance obey. You find yourself on a road at first light, with frost silvering the stones in the uplands. A line of pack animals moves slowly beside you, bells clinking beneath their necks. The drivers say little. Their breath clouds in the cold. Far away, in warmer provinces, scribes are already awake, making marks that will decide grain shipments, labor assignments, and payments in silver. The empire is no longer only a conquest. It is becoming a schedule. Darius the Great comes to power in 522 BC, after a crisis that sounds almost like a riddle carved into stone. The official royal account says that a usurper pretending to be someone else seized power, and that Darius restored rightful order with the help of noble companions. The great inscription at Behistun, studied by generations of scholars and central to the decipherment of cuneiform writing, presents this story in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Stanford and Oxford historians often emphasize that it is both evidence and royal theater. It tells history, but it also sells authority. That is rather convenient. You stand below the cliff of Behistun in imagination, where the inscription rises high above the road, too elevated for easy reading by ordinary travelers. The king appears carved with captives before him, their hands bound, their bodies arranged in a lesson of obedience. Above them, a divine figure hovers, granting approval. The message is simple enough, even if the script is beyond most eyes. Darius has crushed chaos. Darius has restored truth. Darius is not asking for your opinion. The stone face is dry, pale, and immense. Wind scrapes across it. Dust gathers in cracks around ancient signs. The road below carries merchants, soldiers, envoys, and animals who probably care more about water than ideology. Yet above them, the royal message waits, patient as a trap. If power can write itself into a mountain, it begins to feel less like politics and more like geology. The mainstream historical fact here is firm. Darius reorganized the empire into administrative provinces, often called satrapies, each governed by appointed officials responsible for tribute, order, and loyalty. He also strengthened communication routes, standardized aspects of taxation, supported imperial building projects, and used multiple languages for administration. The empire becomes less dependent on one king's personal movement and more dependent on systems that can function across thousands of miles. This sounds dull until you feel what it means. A satrap in Egypt can receive instructions from the royal court. A tax assessment in Lydia can be compared with expected revenue. A messenger can ride across prepared routes with changing horses. A subject people can understand that the king is absent, yet not remote enough to forget them. Administration becomes a kind of invisible architecture. You hear it in small sounds: hooves on packed earth, a seal pressed into clay, a bronze weight set on a scale, a gate latch closing at a storehouse, a clerk clearing his throat before reading a list no one enjoys hearing. This is not the romance of empire. This is its pulse. Darius is often associated with the royal road, especially the route linking Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in the east. Greek writers admired the speed of Persian couriers, describing a relay system that allowed messages to cross enormous distances with remarkable efficiency. Modern historians debate how formally uniform the system was across every region, but the importance of imperial communications is not in doubt. A ruler who hears quickly can punish quickly, reward quickly, and worry everyone more efficiently. You smile slightly at that. Bureaucracy may be boring, but it has excellent stamina. In the heat of Babylonia, canal officials monitor water levels. In Egypt, Persian authority interacts with older pharaonic traditions, temple wealth, and the grain economy of the Nile. In Anatolia, Greek cities negotiate their place under imperial supervision. In the Iranian heartlands, royal residences and storehouses connect elite power to local labor. The empire does not operate everywhere in exactly the same way. That is part of its strength. Uniformity is expensive. Adaptation is cheaper. Still, adaptation does not mean kindness. Taxes can be heavy. Labor can be compulsory. Local elites can profit while farmers bend lower under obligations. The system depends on extraction, even when it uses elegant language. A polished seal on a document does not soften the shoulders of the man carrying barley sacks. It merely tells him the burden has been approved. A quirky fringe tidbit appears along the road, dusty and amusing. Some modern legends imagine the Persian courier network as an ancient secret intelligence web, with hidden riders carrying coded messages through underground routes beneath the empire. The real system was impressive enough without tunnels full of cloaked geniuses. Yet Persia certainly did value information. Spies, inspectors, royal agents, and local informants probably made many governors sleep less peacefully than their furniture deserved. That anxiety is important. Darius must control not only conquered peoples, but also the powerful men who govern them. Satraps can become wealthy. Wealth can become ambition. Ambition can become a very awkward letter from the king, followed by soldiers. So the empire balances trust and suspicion. A governor may rule a province, but military commanders, treasurers, and royal inspectors help prevent him from becoming a small king with large ideas. The open scholarly debate becomes sharper when historians ask how centralized the Persian Empire truly was. Some view Darius as the architect of a highly organized imperial state, with taxation, roads, coinage, and administration tied closely to royal authority. Others stress local variation and the dependence on older regional institutions. Yale specialists in ancient Near Eastern history often remind readers that imperial control was strongest where records survive, which can make the system look smoother than life actually was. And life is never smooth. You walk into a tax office in a provincial town. It is not grand. The walls are mud brick. Reed mats soften the floor in places. A scribe sits cross-legged with tablets, cords, seals, and lists. The room smells of clay, wool, sweat, and stale oil from a lamp recently extinguished. Farmers wait with guarded faces. A local official speaks the language of the people. Another man nearby represents authority from farther away. Everyone understands the performance. Everyone hopes not to be noticed too much. Darius also turns to money and measurement. Persian gold darics and silver sigloi help express royal power in portable form, especially in western parts of the empire, where coinage already has strong roots. Tribute lists and imperial economies remain complex, and not every transaction becomes coin-based. Still, royal currency carries a message. The king's image or symbol moves through hands he will never touch. Metal becomes memory. Payment becomes propaganda. Then there is the canal. Darius completed or restored a canal linking the Nile region toward the Red Sea, an undertaking celebrated in inscriptions using the language of royal achievement. The project reveals imperial imagination at work. Land and water are not fixed obstacles. They are things a king may connect. Rivers, deserts, seas, and peoples can be joined if enough labor, planning, and command are applied. The idea is grand. The shoveling, naturally, is done by other people. Under Darius, the empire becomes a map that can speak back to itself. Not perfectly, not instantly, but enough. Orders travel, tribute travels, soldiers travel, craftsmen travel, ideas travel. The imperial center does not need to flatten every difference because it has learned to coordinate difference. That may be the most remarkable part of Persian rule. It does not require every province to feel Persian. It requires every province to answer. Night settles over a station on the road. Horses stamp in the dark. A courier arrives with dust on his face and impatience in his bones. Another takes the sealed message and rides out before the first has fully dismounted. No one announces the importance of the moment. No crowd gathers. Yet somewhere, days away, a governor's fate may already be moving toward him at the speed of hooves. You feel the empire becoming less visible and more powerful. Palaces may impress the eye, but systems grip the body. Darius measures the world so that it can be taxed, defended, commanded, and imagined as one domain. The old lands remain themselves, but now they are entered into lists. Their harvests, rivers, roads, soldiers, and loyalties become part of a royal pattern. In the quiet between hoofbeats, you understand the nature of this power. It does not only conquer places, it names them, weighs them, connects them, and waits for them to obey. The road leads you toward a terrace cut against the mountains, where stone rises from the plain with a patience that feels almost unnatural. Persepolis does not appear like a crowded city eager for noise. It appears like a ceremony made permanent. The columns stand tall against the sky. The stairways spread wide and shallow, built not for hurried feet, but for processions, pauses, measured breathing, and the careful performance of obedience. Morning light touches the limestone. The surface glows softly, gray, gold, and blue in the changing air. You feel the coolness of the stone beneath your palm. It has held winter frost, summer heat, smoke, rain, royal footsteps, foreign envoys, soldiers, looters, archaeologists, and tourists with sun hats. Stone is very tolerant. It keeps everyone's secrets badly and beautifully. Persepolis, founded by Darius and expanded by later kings, was one of the great ceremonial centers of the Achaemenid Empire. Excavations by the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago revealed palaces, reliefs, inscriptions, and thousands of administrative tablets that transformed scholarly understanding of Persian rule. Researchers from major universities have shown that the site was not only symbolic, it also functioned within a real economy of workers, rations, materials, and movement. That matters, because beauty has a payroll. You ascend the grand stairway slowly. Its steps are unusually shallow, as if designed for dignified movement, or perhaps for people wearing formal garments who preferred not to trip in front of the king. A sensible concern, honestly. On either side, carved delegations approach in endless calm. They come from many lands, bringing vessels, animals, textiles, weapons, ornaments, and tribute. Their beards, hats, robes, and gestures differ, but their rhythm is unified. Diversity becomes choreography. The reliefs do not shout conquest. They whisper order. You see men leading horses with arched necks. You see camels, bulls, rams, and gifts carried carefully in both hands. You see officials guiding delegations forward, touching wrists, directing movement, controlling the grammar of approach. No one appears panicked. No one appears triumphant. The empire presents itself as harmony under royal supervision. It is a polished image, of course. Empires do enjoy flattering mirrors. The mainstream historical fact is clear in these carvings. Persepolis represented the vast reach of Persian rule through visual language, showing subject peoples as participants in a royal order rather than simply defeated enemies. Art historians at Harvard, Chicago, and Oxford have often emphasized the distinctive tone of Achaemenid imperial art. It avoids some of the extreme violence displayed in Assyrian palace reliefs, choosing instead images of controlled abundance, ritualized loyalty, and stable hierarchy. This does not mean Persian power was soft. It means Persian power preferred a different costume. You enter the Apadana, the great audience hall, in imagination. Once, its columns lifted a roof high above polished floors, creating a space where visitors could feel small without anyone needing to say so. The air would have smelled of cedar beams, wool garments, human bodies, incense, leather, metal, and dust from distant roads. Light entered from openings and doorways, catching the edges of carved stone and bright cloth. Voices would rise, then fall quickly. A hall like this trains the tongue to behave. The king is not merely a man here. He is the center of a designed universe. Everything around him tells the visitor where to stand, how to move, when to bow, and what scale of power has enclosed them. Architecture becomes instruction. The terrace itself lifts royal space above the plain, while the mountains behind it seem to anchor the king in something older than politics. A clever arrangement. Nature does half the propaganda for free, yet the site also contains human traces that soften its severity. The Persepolis fortification tablets record rations given to workers, including women, children, skilled laborers, travelers, and officials. They show grain, wine, animals, and supplies being distributed through an organized system. The records complicate the old image of monuments built only by anonymous suffering masses. There was hierarchy, undoubtedly, but there was also administration, compensation in rations, and a surprisingly detailed concern with categories of labor. You pause at that. The palace is grand, but the tablets are intimate. A stone relief shows empire as eternal ceremony. A clay record shows someone received barley. That contrast is the heartbeat of Persepolis. Above ground, the kings speak in timeless images. In the archives, officials track the practical anxieties of food, transport, work teams, and supply lines. The empire needs both illusions and lunch. Remove either one, and things become difficult. A quirky fringe tidbit lingers around the site like moonlight on broken columns. Some modern visitors insist the layout of Persepolis encodes hidden astronomical knowledge, secret calendars, or messages from lost masters who understood the stars better than anyone admits. Serious scholarship treats such claims cautiously, and with raised eyebrows where appropriate. Still, the ceremonial timing of festivals, seasons, and royal appearances may well have connected the site to cycles of renewal. People rarely build sacred political spaces without watching the sky. The open scholarly debate concerns the main function of Persepolis itself. Was it primarily a ceremonial capital for imperial festivals, especially the New Year celebration often associated with renewal and tribute? Was it also an administrative hub with year-round economic activity, or did its importance shift across reigns? Specialists continue to weigh architecture, tablets, seal impressions, and regional context. The site resists being reduced to a single purpose, which is inconvenient for textbooks and excellent for mystery. You walk along a terrace edge at sunset. The plain below stretches into haze. The mountains turn violet. Wind moves through the ruins with a dry sound, like cloth brushing stone. A lizard vanishes between blocks. The carved delegations remain in place, endlessly arriving, never reaching the final moment. Their gifts never touch the royal hand. Their journey never ends. That is the power of relief sculpture. It traps loyalty in permanent motion. Persepolis was also a place of languages. Old Persian royal inscriptions claimed authority in the voice of the king, while Elamite and Babylonian records handled the machinery of daily administration. Aramaic, widely used across the empire, moved through letters and practical communication. The court did not require one tongue to swallow all others. It allowed the empire to speak in layers. Every language carried a different kind of power. The stone around you grows cooler as evening deepens. You imagine delegations arriving from Egypt, Bactria, Lydia, Babylonia, Armenia, and lands beyond easy counting. Their journeys have been long, their gifts selected carefully, their clothing cleaned as well as roads allow. Some come with resentment, some with calculation, some with curiosity, some probably come because their superiors told them to go, which is history's most common reason for travel. The king's court receives them within an architecture designed to turn distance into spectacle. Each far province becomes visible. Each gift becomes proof. Each procession says that the world is many, but the king is one. That message is beautiful, chilling, and efficient. You can admire the carving while noticing the command inside it. Night gathers at Persepolis. The columns become dark ribs against the stars. The stairways lose their warmth. The carved faces, once touched by sunlight, return to shadow. Nothing moves except wind. Yet the silence is crowded. You feel officials walking with tablets, guards shifting at doorways, craftsmen smoothing stone, animals being led across courtyards, envoys waiting to be summoned. Persepolis rises from stone because the empire needs a body. Roads and taxes are invisible to most eyes. The king's authority requires a place where it can be seen, climbed, touched, feared, and remembered. Here, Persia arranges the world into procession. Here, difference is carved into order. Here, the empire dreams of itself as calm, eternal, and perfectly measured. And beneath that dream, somewhere in the archive, a clerk counts rations by lamplight. A scent of cedar smoke, roasted meat, and warm metal settles over the royal court. You're no longer standing before carved processions, but moving into the guarded spaces where empire becomes appetite, ritual, distance, and silence. The halls are broad, the thresholds controlled, the textiles heavy with color. Bronze fittings catch the light. Gold vessels rest in careful order. Servants pass with quiet feet, trained to appear useful and almost invisible. The king is near, but not easily reached. That distance is part of the design. A ruler of many lands cannot seem ordinary. He must be protected from familiarity, because familiarity has sharp little teeth. If people see a king sweat, stumble, cough, or look tired after too much wine, the spell weakens. So the Persian court wraps kingship in protocol, access, clothing, guarded chambers, ceremony, and controlled appearances. The human body remains underneath, inconvenient as ever, but the palace tries very hard to hide it. You hear sandals crossing polished floors. A cupbearer pauses. A guard watches without blinking. Somewhere behind a screen, scribes speak softly over records of food, animals, textiles, and wages. The court smells expensive. It smells of perfumed oil, horse leather, old wood, wool dyes, incense, cooked lamb, and the faint mineral chill of stone after sunset. Luxury is not only comfort here, it is a language. It tells every visitor that the world's abundance has learned where to gather. A mainstream historical fact rests inside this gleaming world. Persian royal courts drew goods, specialists, and tribute from across the empire, including precious metals, fine textiles, horses, carved objects, foodstuffs, and skilled labor. Research connected with the Persepolis fortification tablets, studied by scholars at Chicago and other institutions, shows an administrative system that distributed rations and managed supplies for workers, officials, travelers, and royal operations. Splendor required logistics. The banquet began in the storehouse. This is the hidden engine of magnificence. When ancient writers describe Persian wealth, they often linger over gold couches, jeweled cups, purple fabrics, vast feasts, and royal generosity. But behind each elegant object stands a chain of people: miners, weavers, herders, potters, farmers, metal workers, caravan drivers, scribes, guards, cooks, and supervisors all contribute to the illusion that luxury simply appears around the king. It does not. Someone has to carry the cushions. Court life is also a theater of controlled access. Greek sources describe elaborate customs around approaching the Persian king, including bowing or prostration, though interpretations vary depending on the writer's cultural discomfort. To some Greeks, such gestures seemed excessive, even servile. To the Persian court, they likely expressed hierarchy, awe, and political order. One person's sacred protocol is another person's awkward meeting etiquette. History is full of offended observers taking notes. The open scholarly debate concerns how accurately Greek accounts describe Persian court ceremony. Some historians see valuable observations filtered through prejudice and fascination. Others warn that Greek authors often exaggerated Eastern luxury to contrast it with their own ideals of freedom and restraint. Scholars at Oxford and Yale frequently remind readers that the Persian court must be reconstructed from Persian evidence, Near Eastern traditions, and Greek narratives, each with its own agenda. The truth stands somewhere among them, wearing very good robes. You pass into a quieter chamber. Lamps burn low. The walls hold shadows like folded cloth. A royal meal is being prepared, and the scale is astonishing without becoming loud. Bread in many forms, roasted meats, dates, pomegranates, wine, herbs, stews scented with onion and spice. Dishes from different regions may appear, carrying the empire into the mouth. Food becomes geography made edible. It is possibly the most persuasive kind. Yet courtly abundance has rules. Who eats near whom matters. Who receives gifts matters. Who is invited, delayed, excluded, or watched matters. A cup can honor. A robe can promote. A necklace can bind loyalty more sweetly than a threat. Persian kings used gift-giving as political craft, rewarding nobles, soldiers, envoys, and loyal servants with visible signs of favor. Wealth moved outward, but always from the center, like light from a carefully guarded flame. Royal women also stand within this world, though often behind veils of limited evidence. They were not merely decorative shadows. Administrative tablets mention women receiving rations and managing workforces or estates in certain contexts. Royal and elite women could possess resources, travel, command labor, and influence family politics. Their power may not always appear in royal inscriptions, but absence from official language is not the same as absence from life. Archives are sometimes more honest than monuments. There is a quirky tidbit here, wonderfully earthy beneath all this polish. Ancient writers claimed Persian elites were fond of elaborate banquets and serious drinking, sometimes suggesting that important decisions were discussed twice, once while sober and once while drunk. Whether this tells us more about Persians or about Greek amusement is hard to say. Still, it is a pleasingly human image. Even empires may have suffered from meetings that should have ended earlier. The court also carries religion, though not always in simple form. Persian kings invoke Ahura Mazda in inscriptions, presenting their rule as aligned with truth and order against the lie. Fire held sacred importance in Iranian religious life, though the precise relationship between early royal religion and later Zoroastrianism remains debated. This is a careful subject. The evidence does not allow every later belief to be projected neatly backward. Ancient faith dislikes tidy filing cabinets. You enter a space where a flame burns steadily, protected from wind. Its light moves on metal and faces. No one speaks loudly. Fire is not merely useful here. It is purity, presence, focus, and reminder. In a world of dust, decay, and political deception, a clean flame offers a powerful symbol. It consumes, illuminates, and refuses darkness. That is not a bad image for kingship, although kings, being human, rarely stay as pure as their symbols. The ordinary people of the empire experience this royal world mostly through consequences. They may never see the king, never enter a palace, never touch gold except as tax, coin, or rumor. Yet the court shapes their lives. It demands horses, grain, soldiers, textiles, labor, timber, and obedience. It sends officials. It rewards local elites. It punishes disorder. The king's silence reaches them through documents, messengers, and men with authority in their voices. You stand outside a village at dusk, far from the palace lamps. Smoke rises from simple roofs. A woman shakes dust from a woven mat. A man repairs a yoke with cracked hands. Children chase each other until an elder tells them to stop wasting energy, which children have respectfully ignored for thousands of years, somewhere beyond their horizon. Royal gold gleams. Here, the wealth of empire is measured in grain jars, goats, water rights, and surviving the season. That contrast is essential. Persia's brilliance is not false, but it is incomplete. The palace gathers beauty from many lands, while millions live under obligations that make such beauty possible. The king appears remote because distance protects majesty. But distance also hides cost. You can admire the royal cup and still hear the farmer's tired breathing behind it. Night thickens. The court quiets into guarded stillness. A final lamp is covered. Gold disappears into shadow, becoming only a dull memory of light. Beyond the walls, horses shift in their stalls, and a servant's footsteps fade along a corridor. The empire sleeps unevenly, as all empires do. Some dream on soft cushions. Some dream beside storage jars. Some do not sleep at all, because taxes are due. In this hush, Persian power feels both magnificent and lonely. It shines through fire, gold, ceremony, and silence, but it also depends on people who remain unnamed. The court claims to hold the world in ordered splendor. The world, patient and weary, holds the court up from below. The sound of oars begins in darkness, slow at first, then multiplied until the sea itself seems to breathe in rows. You stand near the edge of the Aegean world, where islands rise from the water like broken pieces of pale stone. The air tastes of salt, pine smoke, fish oil, and fear carefully hidden under jokes. Men mend sails. Priests watch smoke from small sacrifices. Messengers arrive too quickly, which is never comforting. Greece looks eastward, and Persia looks back. This is not a meeting between civilization and emptiness, no matter how some later stories prefer to arrange it. Both worlds are old in their own ways. Both are proud, quarrelsome, religious, ambitious, and convinced that their habits make unusual sense. The Greek cities are not one united nation. despite what a tidy map might suggest. They are rival communities, speaking related dialects, sharing gods, festivals, trade, and insults with impressive enthusiasm. Persia sees them as coastal subjects, allies, rebels, and problems with boats. The conflict begins not with a single heroic moment, but with imperial friction along the western edge of Anatolia. Greek cities in Ionia live under Persian authority through local rulers and satrapal oversight. Some prosper, some resent, some maneuver. Around 499 BC, the Ionian revolt erupts, drawing support from Athens and Eretria and provoking Persian attention. A mainstream historical fact is secure here. The revolt and its suppression helped lead Darius to launch campaigns into mainland Greece, including the expedition defeated at Marathon in 490 BC. Marathon becomes a name with long legs. You can feel the plain in the early morning, wide and tense beside the sea. Dust clings to ankles. Shields creak against leather straps. Greek hoplites stand in heavy armor, packed close, aware that Persian arrows and cavalry have frightened greater men than themselves. The Persians have crossed enormous distances to punish and stabilize a troublesome frontier. The Athenians fight not for all Greece, not exactly, but for their own city, their allies, and the terrifying pleasure of not being ruled by someone else. The battle is later wrapped in memory, pride, and athletic myth. The famous tale of a runner carrying news to Athens has inspired modern marathons, although ancient evidence is messier than the clean legend. Naturally, history refuses to be good marketing without complications. Still, the emotional truth is easy to understand. A city survives, a messenger runs. People imagine victory arriving on exhausted feet. Scholars continue to debate the precise military details of Marathon, including troop numbers, cavalry deployment, and the tactical choices that shaped the outcome. Historians at Oxford and specialists in classical studies often warn that Greek sources preserve both valuable memory and patriotic shapings. Persian perspectives are far thinner, which leaves the eastern side strangely quiet in a story where Persia did much of the marching. Silence, in this case, is not neutrality. It is lost evidence. Then comes Xerxes. The scale changes. The air becomes heavier. In 480 BC, Xerxes leads a massive imperial campaign into Greece, crossing from Asia into Europe after preparations that display both ambition and administrative reach. Herodotus gives enormous numbers for the army, numbers modern scholars usually reduce sharply. Even reduced, the force was impressive. It brought together peoples from across the empire, each with different weapons, clothing, languages, and reasons for being there. Imagine the crossing at the Hellespont. Ships lashed together form bridges across moving water. Soldiers wait in lines that seem endless to the eye. Horses snort. Officers shout in many tongues. The sea strikes the hulls below, impatient and alive. Ancient tradition says Xerxes ordered the waters punished after a storm destroyed an earlier bridge. Whether literal or theatrical, the story captures something important. Even kings of kings cannot command weather without looking slightly ridiculous. A gentle sarcasm belongs here. The Persians advance through northern Greece, where some cities submit, some hesitate, and some resist. Not all Greeks join the anti-Persian cause. That truth complicates the shining marble version of events. Many communities calculate survival. Some see Persia as preferable to local enemies. Some simply know that courage is easier in poetry than when an army is walking toward your fields. The Greek world is divided. As human worlds usually are, at Thermopylae, a narrow pass becomes a stage for memory. A small Greek force led by Sparta delays the Persians, while the wider campaign continues. The last stand of Leonidas and his men becomes one of the most famous episodes in ancient warfare. Yet the pass also included allies from other Greek cities, often overshadowed by later Spartan legend. Fame can be a greedy dinner guest. It eats everyone else's portion. You stand there in imagination, where hot springs steam near rough ground and cliffs press close. The smell is mineral, damp, and sharp. Bronze helmets grow warm. Flies gather where men wait too long in armor. Persian soldiers look toward the narrow way, perhaps irritated by the stubbornness of defenders who must know they cannot hold forever. Greek defenders hear the vastness of the army beyond sight. The pass becomes not merely a military point, but a funnel for fear. The Persian victory at Thermopylae opens the road south, and Athens is abandoned, then taken. The city burns. Temples suffer. Smoke rises into the Attic sky. For Athenians, the trauma becomes sacred memory. For Persia, it may have seemed like the punishment of a rebel city that had interfered in imperial affairs. That difference matters. One side remembers violation. The other remembers enforcement. History often depends on where you were standing when the flames began. Then the sea decides. At Salamis, the Greek fleet fights in narrow waters against the Persian navy. The details remain debated, especially the role of deception, local geography, and command decisions. But the result is clear. The Persian fleet suffers a severe defeat, and Xerxes eventually withdraws much of his force, leaving commanders to continue the campaign. In 479 BC, Greek victories at Plataea and Mycale help end the major invasion. Persia remains powerful, but the conquest of mainland Greece has failed. The waves at Salamis slap against hulls and floating wreckage. Men shout through smoke and spray. Oars snap. Bronze rams strike wood with a sound like the breaking of a house. The narrow straits make numbers difficult to use. The empire that mastered roads, tribute, and distances finds itself crowded into water that favors smaller, familiar fleets. Geography, that old sarcastic tutor, has another lesson prepared. A quirky fringe tidbit floats through this sea battle. Later legends and modern imaginative theories sometimes claim secret oracles, hidden signals, or mystery cult prophecies guided the Greeks toward victory at Salamis. Serious history does not require invisible puppet strings. Themistocles, geography, naval skill, Persian overextension, and Greek desperation are already quite enough. Still, people love to believe great turning points carry whispers from beyond the visible world. It makes panic feel designed. Persia does not collapse after these defeats. That is one of the most important truths. Greek memory can make the wars feel like the central event of all existence, which is very Greek of it. For the Persian Empire, the failed invasion is serious, costly, embarrassing perhaps, but not fatal. Egypt, Babylon, Anatolia, Iran, Central Asia, and other regions remain under royal control. The empire continues to function. Taxes still move. Satraps still govern. Couriers still ride. You notice the imbalance of memory. The Greeks write much of the surviving narrative, so the Persians often become scenery for Greek courage. But if you shift your position, the picture changes. To Persia, Greece is a difficult edge, not the center. To Greek cities, Persia is the enormous East, the power against which freedom can be defined. Each side uses the other as a mirror. Neither mirror is entirely honest. The open scholarly debate remains alive around the meaning of these wars. Were they a decisive clash between political cultures, or a series of frontier conflicts later turned into grand civilizational drama? Many modern historians favor caution. They recognize real differences between Persian monarchy and Greek civic traditions, while resisting the old habit of turning the wars into a simple contest between tyranny and freedom. Human beings are more complicated than slogans, even ancient ones. Evening falls over the Aegean. The sea darkens from blue to iron. On shore, men drag damaged ships above the tide line. Somewhere, a Persian officer counts survivors. Somewhere, a Greek sailor vomits from exhaustion, then claims later he was calm the whole time. Somewhere, a family returns to a burned house and says nothing, because grief sometimes has no ceremonial language. The wars leave behind more than victories and defeats. They leave stories that will be sharpened, polished, exaggerated, and taught for centuries. Persia becomes the great Eastern Empire in Greek imagination, wealthy, vast, hierarchical, magnificent, and dangerous. Greece becomes the small, resistant world in its own memory, brave, argumentative, clever, and occasionally unbearable. Between them, history creates one of its most enduring contrasts. But under the contrast lies a quieter truth. Empires and city-states are both made of frightened people, tired animals, bad weather, ambitious leaders, and decisions made with incomplete information. The Persian Wars are not only about glory. They are about the difficulty of ruling distance, the danger of underestimating local resolve, and the strange way a failed campaign can live longer in memory than a successful administration. As night settles over the water, the oars grow silent. The eastern stars appear above the dark sea. Persia has looked west and found resistance shaped by geography, politics, and chance. Greece has looked east and seen a power too large to forget. Neither side will remain unchanged. The waves carry wreckage softly against the shore, as if even the sea is trying to lower its voice. The palace corridors grow quieter now, not because power has faded, but because it has moved inward. After the great Western campaigns, the empire does not vanish into ruin, despite the confident hopes of its enemies. It remains vast, rich, and complicated, stretching across old kingdoms, mountain roads, river plains, and distant satrapies where local officials still wake before dawn to count what belongs to the king. Yet something in the atmosphere has changed. You walk through a royal residence where lamplight trembles against painted walls. Outside, guards stand beneath a sky washed with stars. Inside, servants lower their eyes and listen more carefully than they appear to listen. The court breathes through curtains, thresholds, and whispers. An empire this large can survive battlefield defeats, but it must constantly survive itself. Brothers, sons, nobles, generals, governors, queens, eunuchs, priests, and scribes all move within the shadow of the throne. The danger is no longer only beyond the frontier. It is also at dinner. A mainstream historical fact gives this world its shape. After Xerxes, the Achaemenid Empire continued for more than a century, ruled by kings such as Artaxerxes I, Darius II, Artaxerxes II, and Artaxerxes III. Major universities with strong ancient history programs, including Yale and Oxford, often stress that this later period was not simple decline. The empire remained powerful, wealthy, and administratively resilient, even while facing rebellions, court struggles, and regional instability. That resilience is easy to underestimate. Greek authors liked stories of Persian luxury, intrigue, weakness, and moral softness, partly because such stories made good warnings for Greek audiences. But a court full of plots does not automatically mean a state is collapsing. Frankly, many governments plot perfectly well for centuries. The Persian system still collects tribute, raises armies, manages provinces, negotiates with Greek states, and intervenes in Mediterranean politics with remarkable confidence. You feel this confidence in the movement of silver. Persian wealth enters Greek affairs not only through armies, but through diplomacy, payments, alliances, and influence. The king's resources can tilt conflicts among Greek cities, especially during the long struggles that follow the great invasions. Persia does not always need to conquer Greece directly. Sometimes it can let Greeks exhaust each other, then fund the useful side. This is less heroic than battle, but often cheaper. Coins pass from hand to hand. Seals close letters. Envoys bow, flatter, calculate, and pretend surprise when everyone lies politely. In one city, a Persian-backed policy is denounced as corruption. In another, it is described as wise diplomacy. The moral vocabulary changes with the payment schedule, as it so often does. The empire also faces repeated tension in Egypt, one of its richest and most symbolically important territories. Egyptian revolts challenge Persian authority across the 5th and 4th centuries BC, and control there becomes a recurring problem. Egypt is not merely another province. It has ancient kingship, temple institutions, agricultural wealth, and a population with deep memory. Ruling Egypt requires more than soldiers. It requires ceremony, negotiation, and the careful wearing of old crowns by foreign kings. In the Nile Valley, the air is different from the Iranian plateau. It is damp with river breath. Papyrus rustles. Ibis birds pick through shallows. Temple walls hold colors that seem to resist time more stubbornly than common sense permits. Persian officials must deal with priests who serve gods older than their empire, farmers tied to flood cycles, and local elites who understand exactly how long a foreign governor can last when the countryside turns cold toward him. The open scholarly debate here concerns the degree of Persian control in difficult provinces during periods of revolt. Some historians describe strong imperial recovery after episodes of rebellion, especially under forceful rulers such as Artaxerxes III. Others emphasize local autonomy, fractured authority, and the limits of central power. Scholars from American research institutions often point out that the evidence varies sharply by region, making the empire look solid in some places and porous in others. A porous empire can still be dangerous. You picture a satrap in western Anatolia sitting late beside a lamp, reading reports from inland roads and coastal cities. His table holds tablets, letters, small weights, and a cup of wine gone sour. He must watch Greeks, local nobles, rival satraps, royal messengers, mercenaries, tax collectors, and perhaps his own relatives. That last category is always unhelpfully active. He serves the king, but he also builds his own network. Loyalty and ambition share the same chair. Satrapal revolts become one of the anxieties of later Achaemenid rule. Powerful provincial governors sometimes challenge royal authority or pursue policies that stretch obedience to its limits. The central court responds with force, negotiation, replacement, reward, or suspicion. Empire becomes a continual conversation between center and edge, with knives under the table. The king needs strong governors to rule distant lands. Yet strong governors are exactly the kind that make kings sleep poorly. There is a quirky tidbit hidden among these tensions. Greek writers loved tales of Persian court medicine, royal banquets, and dramatic punishments, including stories where clever doctors, ambitious queens, or offended nobles alter the fate of kingdoms. Some tales may contain kernels of truth, while others have the rich smell of gossip preserved by educated men who enjoyed a scandal. Ancient courts were probably less theatrical every day, but more theatrical than anyone's safety required. You move through one such courtly night. A banquet hall glows with lamps. Musicians play softly. Wine darkens in cups. The conversation is graceful, measured, and filled with teeth. A noble praises the king too beautifully. A servant notices who refuses a dish. A woman behind a screen hears more than the men imagine. Beyond the walls, guards know that the most dangerous footsteps are sometimes calm ones. Palace politics in the Achaemenid world could be lethal. Royal succession was rarely a gentle family discussion. Sons of kings, mothers of princes, powerful courtiers, and military supporters all mattered. Inscriptions prefer to make legitimacy seem clear, but human inheritance is often muddy. A prince may be noble, competent, and doomed because he has the wrong allies. Another may survive because everyone dislikes him slightly less than the alternative. Still, the empire endures. That is the central mood of this age. Not triumph. Exactly. Not collapse. Endurance. Persia remains the largest political structure in the Near East. It still commands extraordinary resources. It still impresses and frightens neighbors. It still produces royal inscriptions, maintains administrative practices, and shapes the diplomacy of the Eastern Mediterranean. Its shadows grow longer, but long shadows require a large object. Artaxerxes II, who reigns for many decades, faces internal conflict and external pressure, including the famous revolt of his brother Cyrus the Younger. That struggle brings Greek mercenaries deep into Persian territory, remembered through Xenophon's account of the 10,000. The episode reveals both vulnerability and strength. A rebel prince can march against the king with foreign soldiers, yet after his death, the empire does not unravel. It absorbs the crisis, which is annoyingly impressive from the viewpoint of its critics. You see those mercenaries trudging through unfamiliar lands, hungry, suspicious, and surrounded by distances they do not understand. They have entered the body of empire and discovered it is vast beyond their expectations. Villages, rivers, hills, snow, hostile forces, negotiations, and exhaustion follow them. Their story becomes famous in Greek memory, but it also reveals Persia's scale. To escape an empire, you must first survive its geography. The later Achaemenid period is filled with this kind of ambiguity. Strong kings restore control. Weak moments expose fracture. Local powers rise and are pressed down. Greek observers mock Persian luxury while seeking Persian money. Egyptian rebels resist, then face reconquest. Royal women appear in stories as dangerous, influential, or slandered, depending on who is speaking. The archive is uneven. The silence is selective. You stand outside the palace at dawn. The first light touches the roof beams. A groom leads horses across the courtyard. A clerk carries sealed documents under his arm. Somewhere, a prisoner waits. Somewhere, a governor rehearses loyalty. Somewhere, a prince counts supporters and smiles too little. The empire has become older, and age brings memory as well as weight. It remembers how to rule, but also accumulates enemies. It remembers ceremonies, but must repeat them convincingly. It remembers victories, but cannot live on them forever. Its greatness continues, though the strain of holding so many worlds together has begun to show in the joints. In the hush after Xerxes, Persia does not fall asleep. It watches. It suspects. It negotiates. It punishes. It pays. It survives in the half-light of corridors, where the quietest voices may carry the farthest, and where the fate of provinces can turn on a glance across a polished cup. The first warning arrives as a rumor from the northwest, carried by traitors, scouts, and men who speak too quickly when they are afraid. A young king from Macedon has crossed into Asia. At first, the news may not sound impossible. Armies cross borders. Ambitious rulers test their luck. Frontier conflicts flare, then fade. The Persian Empire has endured stronger storms than a northern prince with a sharp spear and excellent self-confidence. But this one keeps coming. You stand on the Anatolian coast, where the sea wind smells of salt, tar, wet rope, and trampled grass. Greek cities look nervously toward the roads inland. Persian commanders gather troops. Local elites calculate survival with the usual delicacy of people who plan to praise whichever side wins. The young Macedonian is Alexander, son of Philip, trained in warfare, wrapped in heroic stories, and convinced that Asia waits for him like a prize in a poem. The first major shock comes at the Granicus River in 334 BC. Alexander defeats Persian forces in Anatolia, opening the road deeper into imperial territory. A mainstream historical fact is firm here. His campaign against Persia unfolded through a series of decisive battles, including Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela, and the eventual occupation of major royal centers. Historians at Princeton, Oxford, and other major institutions often stress that Alexander did not defeat a weak civilization. He defeated a vast empire under intense pressure at critical points. That distinction matters. The Persian Empire still has resources, cities, soldiers, ships, treasuries, and administrative depth. Its king, Darius III, is not simply a foolish shadow placed there for a Macedonian legend to knock over. He inherits a difficult throne, powerful nobles, regional pressures, and an invading army moving with dangerous speed. It is easy for later memory to make him small because Alexander became so large. History should resist that temptation, at least politely. At Issus in 333 BC, the two kings meet in a narrow setting that favors Alexander's aggressive style. The air is hot, wet, and dense with fear. Horses scream in mud. Armor flashes under broken light. Dust mixes with breath until the whole battlefield tastes metallic. Darius's army is larger, but the terrain compresses its strength. Alexander drives toward the center with terrifying focus, and the Persian line gives way. The royal family of Darius is captured after the battle. His mother, wife, and children fall into Alexander's hands, and ancient sources describe the Macedonian treating them with respect. The story becomes part of Alexander's cultivated image as noble conqueror, yet it also has a colder meaning. To capture a king's family is to seize the emotional heart of legitimacy. Mercy can be sincere. It can also be very useful. You follow the road south, where Alexander takes the Levantine coast and turns toward Egypt. This is not random wandering. Persian naval power depends on eastern Mediterranean bases, and coastal control matters deeply. Siege warfare at Tyre reveals the brutality behind the heroic gloss. The island city resists fiercely. Alexander builds a causeway across the water, forcing land toward an island as if geography is merely being stubborn. When Tyre falls, the punishment is severe. Empire meets empire here. One has old administrative patience, the other has youthful momentum. Persia knows how to hold space. Alexander knows how to break decisive points. The contrast is not moral. It is strategic. His army is smaller than the imperial world it attacks, but it is trained, mobile, experienced, and led by a commander willing to risk almost everything in moments that would make sensible people request a chair. A quirky fringe tidbit follows Alexander like a torch in a cave. Ancient and later legends imagine him searching for immortality, speaking with sages, reaching the edges of the world, or descending beneath the sea in a glass vessel. These stories are not reliable campaign reports, obviously. Still, they reveal how people responded to his speed. Ordinary conquest was not enough to explain him, so imagination dragged him toward the supernatural. In 331 BC, the decisive meeting comes at Gaugamela. You are on a wide plain prepared for battle, where Persian forces have cleared ground for cavalry and scythed chariots. The night before, the battle feels stretched and brittle. Fires burn across the plain. Men whisper prayers in many languages. Horses stamp. Officers pretend certainty. Somewhere in the Persian camp, Darius must understand that the future of his house has narrowed to the space between armies. Morning arrives without mercy. The battle is complex, but its outcome is clear. Alexander wins, and Darius flees as the imperial center begins to collapse around him. The open scholarly debate concerns why Persian resistance failed so decisively despite enormous resources. Some historians emphasize Alexander's tactical brilliance and the Macedonian army's structure. Others point to internal strains, command difficulties, over-reliance on assembled contingents, and the challenge of coordinating diverse forces under battlefield pressure. The empire was huge. Huge things can move slowly. You watch the aftermath through dust. Broken chariots lie at odd angles. The plain smells of blood, sweat, churned soil, and leather soaked in fear. Survivors search for water. Officers look for standards. Men who served distant provinces realize that the king's road may no longer lead home. The army has not merely lost a battle, it has lost the appearance of inevitability, which is sometimes more dangerous. Alexander moves into Babylon, then Susa, then Persepolis. These names are not just prizes. They are chambers of imperial memory. Babylon offers legitimacy. Susa offers treasure and administration. Persepolis offers the ceremonial body of Achaemenid kingship. By entering them, Alexander does not simply take gold. He steps into old scripts of power and begins rewriting them around himself. The treasury at Susa is immense. Ancient sources describe staggering wealth, and although figures may be inflated, the reality of accumulated imperial riches is beyond doubt. Gold, silver, vessels, textiles, furniture, and stored value become fuel for the Macedonian war machine. The wealth of centuries changes hands. Coins are struck. Soldiers are paid. Ambition becomes liquid. Then comes Persepolis, and with it, fire. Ancient accounts differ on why the palace complex burned. Some say it was revenge for Persian destruction in Greece. Some blame drunken celebration. Some suggest political theater. Modern scholars continue debating whether the burning was deliberate policy, impulsive violence, symbolic vengeance, or a mixture of motives. The flames matter because they turn conquest into memory. A palace can be occupied quietly. A burned palace becomes a message no one can fully control. You stand at night as fire climbs the beams. Cedar cracks. Smoke coils into the stars. Painted surfaces blacken. Heat pushes people backward across the terrace. Gold reflects flames for a moment, then disappears into glare. The carved delegations still stand in stone, calmly carrying tribute to a king whose house is burning above them. There is something unbearable in that silence. Darius flees east, trying to gather support, but his authority thins with distance. In 330 BC, he is murdered by his own men, including Bessus, a satrap who then claims kingship. Alexander finds Darius dead or dying, depending on the source, and presents himself as avenger of the murdered king. It is a brilliant transformation. The invader becomes heir. The destroyer becomes restorer. Politics, when properly dressed, can change costumes very quickly. Alexander begins adopting elements of Persian royal practice, including dress, court ceremony, appointments of Persian nobles, and marriages designed to bind elites. Macedonian soldiers do not always appreciate this. They have crossed the world to defeat Persia, not to watch their king become suspiciously Persian at dinner. The tension grows between conquest and assimilation. A victor may take a throne, but the throne also takes him. You feel that transformation in the palace air. The accents change. Macedonian officers stand beside Persian courtiers. Documents continue. Taxes do not politely vanish because a new man has arrived. Local administrators remain useful. Royal roads still matter. Storehouses still matter. The machinery of empire survives the dynasty that built it, because machinery often outlives the hands that first turned it. This is the hidden truth of conquest. Alexander kills the Achaemenid Empire as a ruling house, but he cannot simply erase the world it made. He needs its roots, treasuries, officials, ceremonies, and idea of universal kingship. His empire becomes, in part, a Persian inheritance wearing Macedonian armor. The old order breaks, yet its fragments remain sharp and useful. The ordinary people watch with cautious eyes. In a village, a farmer hears that the great king is dead. He still must plant. In a city, a priest learns the new ruler will honor the temple. He adjusts the prayer. In a satrapal office, a clerk changes the name at the top of a record and continues counting. History calls it revolution. Administration calls it Tuesday. The night cools over the conquered lands. Alexander sits where Persian kings once ruled, surrounded by wealth, expectation, resentment, and the lonely suspicion that victory has only enlarged his hunger. The throne is his, but the empire beneath it is ancient, layered, and difficult to possess. Persia has fallen, yet Persian power has not disappeared. It has entered the conqueror's dreams, his clothing, his court, and the shape of the world he now imagines as his own. Dust rises beneath the hooves of riders who seem to appear from nowhere, then vanish before the eye can settle on them. The world has shifted again. The palaces of old kings no longer command the same silence. Macedonian and Greek dynasties have carved their cities across Asia. New names have been placed on old roads. Yet the Iranian plateau has not forgotten how to produce power from distance, patience, and hard country. You stand at the edge of a broad steppe under a pale afternoon sky. The wind tastes of dry grass, horse sweat, leather, and smoke from a campfire almost burned down to ash. A rider adjusts his bow without dismounting. Another checks the girth of a saddle. Their horses are lean, alert, and slightly judgmental, as good horses often are. Here, authority does not begin in a marble hall. It begins in movement. The Parthians rise from the northeast, connected with the region of Parthia and with steppe traditions that favor mobility, archery, and flexible rule. By the 3rd century BC, they begin breaking away from Seleucid control, and under the Arsacid dynasty, they build a kingdom that becomes one of Rome's greatest Eastern rivals. Historians at Yale and Oxford often describe the Parthian world as a blend of Iranian, Hellenistic, Mesopotamian, and steppe elements. It is not a simple return to the past. It is a new political creature. That new creature has a bow. Parthian warfare becomes famous for mounted archers, especially the skill of shooting while retreating. The phrase later remembered as the Parthian shot captures this unsettling tactic, where a rider seems to flee, twists in the saddle, and sends death backward through the dust. It is both practical and theatrical. Very rude. Of course, if you are the one confidently pursuing him. Ancient battlefields were full of such educational disappointments. A mainstream historical fact stands firmly in the sand. In 53 BC, at Carthage, a Parthian force under Surena defeated the Roman general Crassus, destroying much of his army and capturing Roman standards. Scholars from major American universities often treat this battle as one of Rome's most humiliating defeats and a dramatic demonstration of Parthian cavalry warfare. The event did not end Rome. Rome was annoyingly durable, but it showed that the eastern frontier could bite. You feel the heat of Carrhae as if it presses against your throat. Roman soldiers stand in formation, armor heavy, shields tight, mouths dry. The Parthians circle at a distance, their arrows falling again and again. The sound is not one dramatic crash, but a terrible persistence. Bowstrings, hooves, men breathing through dust. The Romans expect close battle, where discipline and iron can decide the day. The Parthians deny them that comfort. Surena himself becomes almost legendary. Ancient sources describe him as enormously wealthy, noble, young, and splendid in appearance, followed by a great retinue. Some details may be embroidered, because ancient writers could not resist a handsome doomed aristocrat. Yet his victory was real enough. Not long after, he was reportedly executed by his own king, perhaps because success made him dangerous. This is one of history's less encouraging workplace lessons. The Parthian Empire differs from the older Persian model in important ways. Its rule is often described as more decentralized, with powerful noble families, regional rulers, and semi-autonomous cities playing major roles. The Arsacid king stands above them, but he does not always command with the same administrative reach once associated with Achaemenid rule. Power is negotiated, distributed, and sometimes unstable. It is a court, a confederation, a warrior aristocracy, and a trade empire all at once. The open scholarly debate concerns how centralized Parthian kingship really was across different periods. Some historians emphasize the king's authority, coinage, diplomacy, and military leadership. Others point to noble power, regional autonomy, and the difficulty of governing a realm stretched between Mesopotamia, Iran, and Central Asia. Specialists in ancient Iranian studies often warn that our evidence is uneven, since many Parthian records have not survived in the way royal inscriptions from earlier periods did. The empire speaks, but often through its enemies. That is a difficult way to be remembered. You enter Ctesiphon in imagination, one of the great royal centers on the Tigris, facing the older city of Seleucia. The river air is warmer, thicker, full of reeds, mud, fish, and the creak of boats. Greek, Aramaic, Iranian languages, and local dialects mingle in markets. Merchants carry glass, textiles, spices, metals, ivory, incense, pearls, wine, and rumors. Here the Parthian world touches Mesopotamia, and Mesopotamia, being ancient and stubborn, touches back. Trade becomes one of the deep strengths of this age. The routes later called the Silk Roads connect China, Central Asia, Iran, India, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean through many linked paths rather than one single road. Parthian lands sit between Eastern producers and Western buyers, making them powerful intermediaries. Silk moves westward. Roman gold and silver move eastward. Ideas travel without passports, as ideas usually do when nobody is watching carefully enough. A quirky tidbit glimmers along these routes. Roman writers complained about the luxury of silk, worrying that expensive Eastern cloth drained wealth and weakened morals. This is wonderfully predictable. When people cannot stop buying something beautiful, they often accuse the fabric of destroying civilization. Somewhere, a merchant probably heard such complaints and raised the price. Parthian identity also expresses itself through art and coinage. Kings appear on coins with beards, diadems, bows, and names written in Greek, especially in earlier periods. The Greek language remains useful as a political and commercial tool inherited from Hellenistic rule. Yet the imagery and culture increasingly emphasize Iranian traditions, noble lineages, and local forms of authority. This mixture is not confusion. It is survival with layers. You sit beside a caravan at night. Camels kneel with irritated dignity. A fire burns low. Traders speak of dangerous passes, greedy officials, desert wells, and a rumor that bandits have been seen beyond the ridge. The stars are cold and bright. Somewhere far west, Roman senators debate Eastern policy. Somewhere far east, Chinese courts hear reports of lands beyond the mountains. Between them, Parthian roads and agreements help turn distance into profit. Rome and Parthia circle each other for centuries. Armenia becomes one of their great contested zones, a kingdom caught between two imperial gravitational fields. Each side wants influence there, partly for strategy, partly for prestige, and partly because powerful states are rarely good at leaving buffer zones alone. Campaigns cross the Euphrates. Treaties are made. Envoys exchange gifts. Prisoners return. Standards are recovered. Pride is rearranged into diplomacy. In 20 BC, during the reign of Augustus, the Romans recover the standards lost at Carrhae through negotiation rather than battlefield revenge. Roman propaganda presents this as a grand victory, with statues, coins, and poetry celebrating the return. The Parthians likely saw it as a diplomatic exchange that avoided unnecessary war. Two empires, one event, two very satisfied press releases. Some habits are eternal. The Parthian court carries its own dignity, though it is harder to see clearly than the carved stairways of earlier Persian kings. Royal power appears in ceremonies, coins, noble assemblies, marriages, military retinues, and control over key cities. The king must balance great families whose support can make or ruin him. This creates vitality and danger together. A flexible system can absorb shocks, but it can also invite rivalry. You hear it in a noble camp before dawn. Horses stamp in darkness. Men sharpen blades. A prince speaks softly with supporters near a tent flap. No one uses the word rebellion yet. That would be impolite. Instead, they discuss justice, legitimacy, and the kingdom's unfortunate need for better guidance. Treason often begins with excellent vocabulary. The Parthian world keeps alive an Iranian imperial idea without copying the older pattern exactly. It proves that Persia's legacy is not a museum object. It can ride, trade, negotiate, and shoot arrows backward. It can wear Greek letters on coins while resisting Roman armies. It can govern through aristocrats, cities, temples, and routes rather than one perfectly polished administration. It can look fragmented and still endure. As night deepens over the steppe, the riders return to the edge of firelight. Their faces are half hidden beneath caps and shadows. Their bows rest close beside them. Beyond the camp, the plain opens into distances that no wall can fully command. This is the power of Parthia. It does not always build the tallest monuments. It does not always leave the clearest archives. But it knows how to live between worlds, how to let enemies advance too far, and how to make the horizon itself feel armed. The flame returns first, small and steady, protected from the wind by careful hands. Around it, the room is dim, fragrant with ash, clean wood, and the faint bitterness of sacred smoke. A priest watches the fire as if watching a living witness. Outside, beyond the walls, a new dynasty gathers itself with a sharper idea of kingship, more formal, more centralized, and more eager to remember ancient glory in its own image. You are entering the Sasanian age. The old horse kingdoms have not vanished in a single breath. Their nobles, cities, roots, and habits remain in the bones of the land. Yet in the 3rd century A.D., Ardashir I rises from Persis and defeats the last Arsacid ruler, establishing the Sasanian Empire. This is not only a change of royal family, it is a new declaration of what Iranian power should be: stronger monarchy, clearer sacred authority, a court that looks backward to earlier greatness while building something distinct. The air feels more deliberate now. Sasanian kings present themselves as rulers of a restored Iranian order. They use rock reliefs, silver plates, coins, inscriptions, fire temples, and court ceremony to project majesty. A mainstream historical fact is secure here. The Sasanians ruled from AD 224 to 651 and became Rome's greatest eastern rival, later facing the Byzantine Empire in long cycles of war and diplomacy. Historians at Oxford, Princeton, and major research centers often describe the Sasanian state as one of late antiquity's dominant powers. Their kingship has a harder edge. The ruler is no longer merely first among powerful nobles, though noble families remain important and sometimes troublesome. The Sasanian king claims a sacred radiance, an aura of legitimacy tied to divine favor and royal fortune. Coins show crowned rulers with distinctive headgear, each crown carefully designed, each image a statement of cosmic permission. Ancient branding, but with better metalwork. You hold one of these coins in imagination. It is small, cool, and bright against your palm. On one side, the royal face stares with solemn confidence. On the other, a fire altar rises between attendants. The message is compact and powerful. King and sacred flame belong in the same field of vision. Authority and purity face each other across silver. Religion matters deeply in this world, though its exact relationship to state power changes across reigns. Zoroastrian institutions become more visible and influential under the Sasanians, with priests, sacred fires, ritual law, and texts gaining stronger public roles. Yet the empire is not religiously simple. Jews, Christians, Manichaeans, Buddhists, and local cults live within its borders in different regions and under shifting levels of tolerance or pressure. An empire is never one prayer repeated everywhere. The open scholarly debate concerns how unified Sasanian Zoroastrianism truly was, especially in the earlier centuries. Some scholars emphasize a state-supported religious structure that grew increasingly organized. Others caution that practice varied by region, class, and period. Specialists at institutions such as Columbia and Yale often note that later religious texts may preserve older traditions, but they also reflect centuries of interpretation. Faith leaves records, but records do not always arrive quietly. You walk through a city street in southwestern Iran. The afternoon is hot, and dust clings to the hem of every garment. A metal worker taps silver into a shallow bowl. A woman carries bread wrapped in cloth. A Christian merchant speaks softly with a Zoroastrian official, both polite, both aware that politics can make theology suddenly expensive. Children chase a stray dog until an elder complains that the empire is clearly declining due to noise. The Sasanian Empire builds and manages cities with real ambition. Ctesiphon remains a major royal center, glittering beside the Tigris, while other cities grow through warfare, deportation, trade, and royal planning. Captured populations from Roman territories are sometimes resettled inside the empire, bringing skills, crafts, languages, and new religious communities. This practice could be harsh, yet it also enriched urban life. Conquest, inconveniently, can be both brutal and creative. One of the most striking examples is the development of cities associated with Shapur I, who defeated Roman armies and captured Emperor Valerian in AD 260. That capture was astonishing. A Roman emperor taken alive by a Persian king was a shock that rippled through late antique imagination. Sasanian rock reliefs show Shapur triumphant, with Roman emperors kneeling, standing, or submitting before him. The images are propaganda. Certainly. They are also history in stone. You stand before one of these reliefs at Nakshi Rostam in the lowering light. The cliff glows warm. Figures emerge from rock, larger than life, arranged in royal certainty. Shapur sits on horseback, composed and victorious. Roman power, normally so proud in its own monuments, appears here as humbled foreign bodies. The scene is quiet now, but its message once struck like a drum. A quirky tidbit clings to Shapur's world. Later stories connect captured Roman engineers and artisans with grand Sasanian building projects, especially bridges, dams, and hydraulic works. Some details remain difficult to prove, but the broader idea is plausible enough to be fascinating. Imagine being a Roman specialist, expecting a campaign, and instead finding yourself contributing to Persian infrastructure. Ancient career paths could be surprisingly involuntary. Sasanian art develops a rich visual language. Silver plates show royal hunts with kings pursuing boars, lions, rams, and other animals in stylized landscapes. These are not casual sporting scenes. The royal hunt symbolizes control over chaos, courage, abundance, and the king's ability to dominate the wild. The animal leaps. The king aims. Order is restored with excellent posture. Court ceremony becomes famous for grandeur. Later, Islamic and Byzantine writers preserve impressions of Sasanian splendor, including elaborate textiles, jeweled thrones, formal audiences, and strict hierarchy. Some descriptions may be exaggerated, because foreign writers love a dazzling court almost as much as they love condemning it. Still, Sasanian royal culture clearly shaped ideas of majesty far beyond Iran. The image of the distant, Richly adorned king would echo through later courts for centuries. The ordinary worker remains beneath the glitter. Fields must be irrigated. Taxes must be gathered. Armies must be supplied. Fortifications must be built. The Sasanians inherited an old truth and sharpened it. Kingship survives only when farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, priests, merchants, scribes, and forced laborers keep the world moving below the ceremonial surface. The fire may be sacred, but the wood still has to be brought. Military organization becomes a defining feature of Sasanian strength. Armored cavalry, often associated with noble warriors, forms a prestigious arm of the army. Fortified frontiers, especially in Mesopotamia and the Caucasus, become vital. Wars with Rome and Byzantium are not occasional interruptions. They are recurring structures of life. Generations grow up with the frontier as a wound that never fully closes. You hear the sound of a Sasanian cavalry force assembling at dawn. Horses snort steam into cold air. Scale armor clicks softly. Leather straps tighten. A nobleman adjusts his helmet, perhaps admiring himself just enough to be historically believable. Priests may bless the campaign. Scribes may record supplies. Families may watch from a distance. Silent because farewell is easier when no one decorates it with too many words. The empire also looks eastward. Central Asian frontiers bring contact and conflict with Huns, Turks, and other powerful groups across time. Trade links connect Iran to India, China, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. Silk, spices, precious stones, ideas, and diseases move through these networks. Sasanian Persia is not a sealed kingdom between Rome and the desert. It is a hinge of the late antique world. Night falls beside a fire temple. The flame does not leap wildly. It stays composed, fed and guarded. Outside, the empire stretches across cities, farms, mountains, deserts, roads, and frontiers. It is proud, dangerous, cultured, and deeply aware of its own dignity. It does not merely inherit the name of Persia. It reshapes the inheritance into a new imperial dream. In the stillness, the fire seems to remember every throne that claimed the land before it. Yet it belongs to this age, to these kings, to this vision of order under sacred light. The Sasanian flame returns not as nostalgia, but as command. It says that power can fall, rise, change its crown, and still believe itself ancient. The frontier grows tired before the armies do. Along the lands between Persia and Byzantium, fortresses stare at one another across rivers, plains, hills, and desert roads, each stone carrying the memory of earlier sieges. You feel the air change near the borderlands. It smells of horse sweat, old smoke, hot dust, and iron left too long in the sun. The villages here know how to listen for distant movement. They know which direction means merchants, which means tax collectors, and which means soldiers. War becomes a season. For generations, the Sasanian Empire and the Roman world, later the Byzantine Empire, struggle over Armenia, Mesopotamia, Syria, the Caucasus, and the symbolic weight of victory itself. Sometimes the wars are sharp and brief. Sometimes they drag into exhaustion, eating men, animals, coin, patience, and faith in royal promises. Neither side is foolish. Neither side is weak. That is precisely the problem. Two powerful states stand close enough to wound each other, but not easily enough to finish each other. A mainstream historical fact gives this age its grave rhythm. In the early 7th century AD, King Khosrow II fought a devastating war against the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, during which Persian forces captured major cities, including Jerusalem in 614, and entered Egypt in 619. Historians at Princeton, Oxford, and major centers for late antique studies often describe this conflict as one of the most destructive wars of the ancient Near Eastern world. It stretched both empires toward their limits. You stand outside Jerusalem after its fall, not to linger on horror, but to feel the shock of meaning. Sacred cities are never only strategic. They are memory made of stone. When Persian forces capture it, the event echoes across Christian communities with deep spiritual fear. The true cross is reportedly taken away, becoming not only a relic, but a political wound. For the Sasanians, the victory proclaims royal strength. For Byzantium, it becomes humiliation sharpened by theology. Then Egypt falls under Persian control. The Nile, with its grain, temples, cities, monasteries, and thick green life, passes into Sasanian hands for a time. Imagine the administrative burden wrapped inside that triumph. Conquest may look majestic on a map, but somebody must collect taxes, calm towns, supply troops, and explain new authority to people who already had enough officials in their lives. Imperial success often arrives carrying its own headache. The Byzantine response comes through Heraclius, who rebuilds morale, reorganizes resistance, and carries war deep into Persian territory. His campaigns are difficult, risky, and dramatic, though later memory dresses them in even brighter colors. By 627 at Nineveh, Byzantine forces win a major victory. Soon after, Sasanian politics convulse. Khosrau II is overthrown and executed, and the empire enters a period of rapid instability. The palace becomes colder. You walk through Ctesiphon in imagination, where the royal court feels heavy with rumor. The Tigris moves beyond the walls, indifferent as old water always is. Courtiers speak quietly. Nobles calculate. Generals weigh loyalty against survival. A throne that once seemed sacred now attracts dangerous eyes. Kings appear and disappear with alarming speed. The empire has not merely lost a war, it has lost rhythm. The open scholarly debate concerns how deeply the final Roman-Persian War weakened the Sasanian state before the Arab conquests. Some historians argue that the war fatally drained manpower, finances, legitimacy, and provincial stability. Others caution that the empire still possessed resources and might have recovered under calmer conditions. Scholars at Yale and Chicago often point to the sudden succession crises and plague conditions as additional pressures. Collapse rarely has one cause. It prefers a committee. There is disease, too. Late antique plague waves had already struck the region in earlier decades, disturbing populations, armies, labor systems, and revenues. The exact impact on Sasanian society remains debated, since the evidence is uneven. Yet you can imagine what epidemic fear does to an empire already strained by war. Fields go untended. Families vanish from tax lists. Officials demand what villages can no longer provide. The archive begins to thin where lives have gone missing. A quirky fringe tidbit moves through this period like a whisper in a ruined hall. Later legends imagine Khosrau II surrounded by astonishing luxuries, including magnificent gardens, jeweled thrones, and a fabulous carpet said to depict spring itself, with rivers, flowers, and fields woven in costly materials. Historians treat the grandest details cautiously, since conquest stories enjoy expensive furniture. Still, the legend has power. It pictures a king trying to keep eternal spring indoors while winter gathers outside the gates. That image lingers. Then a new force rises from Arabia. At first, Persian elites may not grasp its scale. Raiding across desert frontiers is not new. Arab groups have long lived near and within imperial border systems, serving as allies, clients, merchants, soldiers, and rivals. The Lakhmids at Al-Hira had once helped shield Sasanian interests on the Arabian edge. When frontier arrangements weaken, the desert becomes less like a boundary and more like an opening. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632, Muslim Arab armies expand with remarkable speed under the early caliphate. Persian forces meet them in a series of battles, and the results become catastrophic for Sasanian control. The Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, usually dated to the 630s, breaks Persian power in Iraq. Ctesiphon falls. Later. The Battle of Nahavand in 642 is remembered by Islamic tradition as a decisive victory that opens Iran more fully to conquest. You stand near a battlefield at dawn, where reeds tremble beside water and dust hangs low over the plain. Persian troops carry the weight of an ancient military tradition, with armored cavalry, banners, officers, and memories of royal victory. Arab forces bring mobility, religious conviction, tribal organization, and commanders hardened by rapid campaigns. Neither side is made of myth. Both are made of men who sweat, fear, misjudge, pray, and obey. The fall of Ctesiphon is more than a military event. It is the loss of a royal center, treasury, administrative heart, and symbol of imperial continuity. Imagine soldiers entering halls where Sasanian ceremony once controlled every gesture. Carpets are lifted, storehouses opened, records disturbed. People hide valuables badly, because panic is a poor accountant. The city does not stop existing, but its meaning changes. Yazdegerd III, the last Sasanian king, flees eastward, seeking support across a shrinking world. His movement becomes a sorrowful map of collapse. A king without secure capital becomes less a son and more a wandering ember. In 651, he is killed near Merv, ending the Sasanian royal line in practical terms. The old empire is gone, though not every province changes instantly, and not every community experiences conquest in the same way. This is important. The Arab conquest does not erase Iran overnight. Languages continue. Landholding patterns adapt. Local elites negotiate. Zoroastrian communities endure, though under changing conditions. Christian, Jewish, and other communities also find new arrangements. Persian administrators and scribes remain useful because conquerors, like everyone else, eventually discover that taxes do not collect themselves. The political roof changes, but many rooms below remain occupied. You hear the slower sound beneath the conquest. A village headman learns new obligations. A priest hides ritual objects or keeps them openly, depending on local terms. A merchant tests new routes. A young soldier from Arabia hears Persian speech in a marketplace and realizes the world is larger than the desert stories of his childhood. A Persian noble decides whether resistance, conversion, service, or silence offers the best future for his children. The empire has exhausted itself against one great rival, only to face a movement it did not fully understand. Yet the ending is not simple darkness. It is transformation, painful and immense. The ancient royal fire loses its throne. But Persian memory enters the Islamic world with extraordinary force. Its scribes, governors, scholars, poets, and court traditions will shape what comes next in ways no battlefield can neatly predict. Night settles over the abandoned confidence of kings. The banners have changed. The prayers sound different in public spaces. The old palaces stand with dust gathering in corners where servants once hurried. Still, beneath the silence, Iran remains awake, carrying older habits into a new age, wounded but not emptied. The empire that seemed to end does not remain ended. It changes clothing, language, prayer, and courtly manners. Yet something older keeps moving beneath the surface. You enter a world where the old royal houses are gone, but their habits remain inside government offices. Poems, gardens, titles, legends, and dreams of rightful kingship. Persia becomes less a throne than a memory with hands. You hear those hands turning pages. The air smells of ink, paper, lamp oil, rosewater, and dust rising from a courtyard in late afternoon. A scribe bends over a manuscript, shaping letters with slow care. Outside, water moves through a narrow channel, cooling a garden divided into measured lines. Fruit trees cast shade over tile and packed earth. Somewhere nearby, a storyteller begins speaking of ancient kings, lost crowns, heroic battles, and moral tests disguised as adventure. Political conquest has not erased cultural power. It has released it into new forms. A mainstream historical fact sits calmly inside this transformation. Persian language, administration, court culture, literature, and artistic traditions became deeply influential across the Islamic world, especially under later dynasties such as the Abbasids, Samanids, Ghaznavids, Seljuks, and beyond. Scholars at Harvard, Princeton, and Oxford often describe Persianate culture as one of the great civilizational forces of the medieval world. That word matters. Persianate does not mean only Persian by blood or territory. It means a wide cultural style, a shared language of courts, poetry, manners, kingship, bureaucracy, gardens, history, and imagination. It travels across Central Asia, India, Anatolia, Iraq, and beyond. It allows rulers who are not ethnically Persian to speak power in Persian forms. A conquered culture becomes a teacher of conquerors, which is one of history's quieter jokes. You stand in an administrative office under early Islamic rule. The room is plain, but its habits are ancient. Records are kept, taxes are assessed, land is measured. Officials write with the grave expression of people who know civilization depends on paperwork, which is unfortunate but true. Persian scribes and bureaucratic practices prove useful to new rulers because governing a large realm requires more than victory and enthusiasm. A soldier may take a city. A clerk keeps it paying. The old Sasanian idea of majestic kingship also survives in altered forms. Islamic rulers could not simply copy Zoroastrian sacred monarchy, but they inherited many courtly expectations from Iranian and late antique traditions. The ruler sits at a formal distance. Ceremony matters. Robes, audiences, titles, gardens, palace layouts, royal hunts, and displays of justice all carry echoes of older worlds. Authority needs a costume, and Persia had kept a very impressive wardrobe. A quirky tidbit appears in the world of legend. The great Persian epic tradition would preserve stories of kings and heroes stretching into mythic time, where rulers possess supernatural glory, warriors fight demons, and royal fortune shines or abandons men according to moral failure. These tales are not simple history. Naturally, dragons and magic birds are generally poor witnesses in court, yet they protect emotional truth. A people remembers itself not only through archives, but through wonder. The most famous flowering of this memory comes in the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, composed by Ferdowsi around the year 1000. It gathers myth, legend, and historical memory into a monumental poetic vision of Iranian identity. It does not restore the old empire as politics. It restores it as imagination. That may last longer. Armies must be fed. Stories feed themselves whenever someone listens. You sit in a quiet room as a reciter speaks by lamplight. The audience leans inward. Children stare wide-eyed. Elders pretend not to be moved. With limited success. Names of ancient kings pass through the air like sparks. The listeners know the world has changed. They know old fires have dimmed, old courts have fallen, and old gods are no longer honored in the same way. Yet the story gives continuity to loss. The open scholarly debate concerns how memory of pre-Islamic Persia shaped later Iranian identity. Some historians emphasize continuity, seeing administrative, literary, and courtly traditions as bridges across conquest. Others stress transformation, arguing that later Persian identity was reshaped profoundly within Islamic civilization. Researchers at major American and European universities often frame the question as both continuity and reinvention. The past survives, but never without changing its voice. That voice spreads beautifully. Persian becomes a language of poetry, diplomacy, love, mysticism, history, and refined power. It moves into courts from Central Asia to northern India. Rulers commission chronicles. Poets praise patrons and quietly insult them with elegance when payment disappoints. Sufis use Persian verse to speak of longing, annihilation, divine love, and the strange poverty of the soul. Lovers borrow its images of gardens, wine, nightingales, candles, and wounds that somehow remain polite. The garden returns as well. The enclosed, watered garden becomes one of Persia's most enduring gifts to world imagination. It is order against desert, shade against heat, flowing water against dust, fragrance against exhaustion. In garden design, old royal ideas of measured paradise continue to breathe through Islamic forms. You walk beside a channel where water catches moonlight. Cypress trees stand upright like dark green flames. The world outside may be uncertain, but within the walls, someone has persuaded nature to whisper. Art carries the inheritance in color and pattern, metalwork, textiles, ceramics, manuscript painting, architecture, and calligraphy. Transform older motifs into new visual worlds. Winged crowns may vanish, but royal grace remains. Fire altars fade from coins, but balanced composition, formal dignity, and symbolic gardens endure. The line between survival and transformation becomes impossible to draw cleanly. It is like watching dye spread through water. You feel Persia in the idea of the just king, the wise minister, the dangerous court, the garden of power, the heroic past, the learned scribe, and the melancholy poet who knows every empire is temporary. That melancholy is important. Persian memory does not merely celebrate rule. It often questions fortune. It asks why glory fails, why kings become cruel, why wise counsel is ignored, and why time is so patient with human vanity. The empire that would not die becomes a mirror. In that mirror, conquerors see legitimacy, poets see sorrow, bureaucrats see order, gardeners see paradise measured by water. Ordinary people see fragments of a past made bearable through story. Persia survives because it becomes more than territory. It becomes a way of imagining power, beauty, memory, and loss, and now the night grows softer around you. The lamps burn lower. The ink dries on the page. A breeze enters the courtyard and stirs the leaves with such gentleness that even history seems willing to rest. You do not need to solve the whole mystery. You only need to notice how strangely human it is. This wish for power to outlive the body. This longing for names to remain after walls have fallen. Perhaps every empire ends twice. First, when its armies fail. Then, much later, when its stories stop being told. Persia never fully surrendered that second ending. It passed into language, ceremony, poetry, gardens, memory, and the quiet architecture of later worlds. So you let the image fade slowly. A road under stars, a flame behind a wall, a king's name on silver, a poem spoken softly after midnight, a garden where water keeps moving in the dark. The stones are still there somewhere. The dust is still there. The silence is still there, patient as ever. And perhaps, beneath all the centuries of conquest and forgetting, the story is not yet complete. Now let the old roads fall away. Let the horses grow distant. Let the palace doors close gently. And let the last courier ride beyond the hills without needing to be followed. You are safe here, far from the heat of battle, far from the guarded halls where kings measured loyalty with careful eyes. Only the quiet remains, and the slow breath of night moving across ancient stone. The garden is cooler now. Water slips through its channel with a soft, even sound. Leaves stir above you, dark against a sky filled with patient stars. No empire asks anything from you. No scribe waits with a tablet. No messenger comes with urgent news. The old world has lowered its voice. You can rest. Perhaps history is not a command to remember everything. Perhaps it is only an invitation to feel the depth beneath ordinary life. A cup of water. A road in dust, a name carved in stone, a song carried across generations. These small things remain, even when kings vanish. So let the centuries loosen their grip. Let Persia become moonlight on a courtyard, ink drying on a page, a flame protected by careful hands. Let every war soften into distance. Let every throne become only a shadow beneath the stars. And as the night folds itself around you, the long story settles into silence.